What is or should be the line between fan-generated content and the more traditional outlets when talking about media credentials? I bring in co-host and creator of the Pewtercast podcast, Brent Allen, to discuss. Plus, I found out why free agent center Ryan Jensen wanted to sign with the Bucs from his dad. In an interview I know you will enjoy. All that and more coming up right now on Ren's Training Camp Journal.
Well, you made me weep, and you made me moan. Well, you caused me to leave, child, my happy home. But someday, baby, you ain't worry my life anymore.
Welcome back, listeners and subscribers, to Ren's Training Camp Journal, Episode 9. As I told you in the opening, I'm going to go ahead and bring in Brent Allen, the co-host and creator of the Pewtercast, where, of course, I co-host as well. And we had some interesting interaction on Twitter. Brent, you posted just sort of a general question referring to media credentials, and because, we were so thankful to the Bucs for getting us 2 days last week. First off, welcome. Hello. Welcome to the show.
Good to be back here on Ren's Training Camp Journal. It's always a good time getting a guest here.
But why don't you just sort of, talk about, what happened, what you threw out there, and sort of how this turned into this really good conversation about where Buccaneers media is now and where it might go, and sort of how we fit into it.
Sure. Well, first, a small correction. It wasn't a question that I threw out. It was simply a comment where I said, I just want to take a moment and thank the Buccaneers organization for how they've embraced the Pewtercast and me. This was on my personal account, by the way. This was not through the Pewtercast. This was my own personal account. How they've embraced the Pewtercast and me. I said, being credentialed media, even if for just 2 days, is the highlight of my summer, and I look forward to when that credentialing is more permanent. Just a nice little tweet saying thank you.
Right.
And by the way, there have been several people who have tweeted to the Buccaneers saying thank you on our behalf.
True.
And I want to say thank you to all of you guys who have done that. That matters more than you probably know, and probably way less than I think it does. So, but thank you for doing that. But then what happened with that was our friend Mark Cook over at the Pewter Report, he jumped online and was just kind of talking about the line between what I call fan-generated media and then traditional media. That line is getting blurred. And it really sparked this entire conversation that's been happening now for 2 days, I think it's been. And tons of people.
2 days. 2 days by the clock. I mean, it didn't really get rolling until about probably 8, 9, 10 o'clock last night.
Sure, I've lost track of time, honestly, with this whole thing. But
just a small correction.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So either way, it's really blown up into this big thing, and there's just been all these different likes and different retweets and different people commenting and different people with different viewpoints and so Mark got involved and actually Joe Bucks fan got involved and Derek from over at What the Buck got involved and lots of our fellow fans have commented, and it's really gone back and forth about the idea of who gets credentialed, where do people get credentialed. We've had a lot of people who kind of chiming into the conversation but more just tweeting support for us and for our show for what we do, and I will say this, and I'm not going to sit here and recount the entire conversation. If people want to read it, my Twitter handle personally is @BrentAllenLive. You can go back there, you can check it out, and you're going to have to follow it because it's not all linear. Like, you'll have to see the different people who jump in and kind of check out and see what thread they're commenting on, and sometimes people are commenting on multiple threads that this thing kind of spidered out, a little bit. So, but it's been a really good conversation that is really focused around the idea of who is credentialed, what is bias in the media, especially when it comes to sports and sports entertainment and what that looks like, and who should or shouldn't get credentialed, and a lot of it of just something I'm very, very flattered by. A lot of people who really hope that we continue down this credentialing path into something that's a little bit more permanent. They really enjoyed the content that we were able to put out just from those 2 days. It certainly, I think, it changed the it didn't change what we do, but it changed some of the type of content I think we were able to put out. I think it added. For sure. It added for sure in a lot of ways, and it added in a really good way. Allowed us, I think, to contribute to the conversation of what's going on with the Buccaneers in a new way. Add to the conversation things that other people weren't just saying. So, yeah, that's kind of what's been going on.
Let's start to get into some of the sides of this, and then we can discuss it. As you mentioned earlier, you put out the tweet, and Mark Cook from the Pewter Report just on his personal account, not the Pewter Report account. Right. I want to make that clear. The line is blurred, and then PA Buck or Pabuk, however you want to say it, at Opie8699 just replied to that and said explain, and poof, we were off and running. Right. Why don't you sort of sum up Mark Cook's thoughts?
Sure.
About how where he stands on that, and we'll start there.
Yeah, and I want to start this off by just saying, we have been able to develop a relationship with Mark, really with all the guys there at the Pewter Report, but with Mark and Trevor specifically, and even Scott to some extent, and and I don't necessarily want to speak for Mark or those guys. So I'm really just referring to what they have actually put out on Twitter. Does that make sense? And the other thing is this is an issue that I think we see differently on. But and that's been actually the cool thing about this conversation, because I don't feel like we've lost a friendship over this issue. You know what I mean?
This was an extremely cordial
very much
conversation.
So. Very much so.
Like everyone was just, this wasn't a political or a social, social issue hot button where it's just two people screaming, like two sides screaming at each other saying, you're dumb, no, you're dumb. No, this was, I quoted your tweet and said this was a really good conversation between a lot of smart people. Uh-huh. So, this wasn't a yelling, screaming match, and Mark Cook said a lot of how much he likes us and likes our content,
right?
But
I don't want to say they, because neither Trevor nor Scott chimed into this.
Yeah.
So let me just keep it to Mark. Mark is of the opinion that fans should not be credentialed as media. But he also was quick to say he knows that is changing. He knows that the organization is going back and forth on that, and he really doesn't have a solution, and he doesn't have an idea. But he is very, he's very much in that spot of, if you're going to be credentialed as media, then you have to be unbiased, and you cannot, you don't show bias in anything that you talk about. And
like using the word we when talking about the team, like we're included.
Yeah, and that is one example that he gave for sure. That is something that honestly I just disagree with. And all due respect to those guys, I appreciate their opinion. I just happen to think it's wrong. I think that media, the landscape of media, what media is. And, media is no longer just reporting the news. It's no longer reporting the facts, and it hasn't been for decades at this point. In fact, you could even say that media never really was just strictly reporting the news. And I'm bringing my own little personal bit of history teacher coming out. Like when I think of the origins of many of the media outlets, national media outlets here in the United States, is just in our country alone. But anyway, but yeah, I just, the idea that we as fans, and Ren, I think when we got out there and we had our credentials for those 2 days, even though we are fans, I
Mhm.
don't think that we went out there and conducted ourselves as fanboys. You know what I'm saying? Like we were able to.
I agree.
Yeah, like the idea that if you're a fan, you can't conduct yourself professionally. I think, and I don't think Mark's actually even saying that. You know,
Yeah.
It's you know, we have often said that we are fans of the team, and you know, unashamedly we are biased in the things that we talk about. However, that doesn't mean that we can't give honest evaluation and analysis of what we're seeing. That doesn't mean that we can't conduct ourselves professionally there around the team, and that doesn't mean that you know, whatever those things that people think that you have to be unbiased for, just because you're a fan of the team, I don't think negates those aspects. Does that make sense?
Just because we, you know, our show, you know, by fans for the fans, we like to always look on the optimistic side
Mhm.
of the Buccaneers. But, you know, there's like this offseason, we were calling for Jays Hayes head. We were calling for Nate Katzer special teams coach. Like we thought those guys needed to go. You know, I've put out on the pod that Vernon Hargreaves has been trash. You know, I use that exact word of his play his first 2 years. So we're not these ride or die fans where if you say something negative about Quan Alexander, like, hey, he's a liability in pass coverage, which I have said on previous pods, you know, definitely, you know, during last season, we're not going to release the hounds and start yelling at people who have that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is the way I look at it. You know how when you watch Buccaneers Insider Live with Casey Phillips and Scott Smith, like they're always on the optimistic side.
Sure.
You know, do you count them as credentialed? Yeah, well, they work for the Buccaneers, so
they're certainly not unbiased.
They're certainly not unbiased,
Right.
but they definitely are our immediate outlet. Like you can't argue. They use the word we and they use the word Buccaneers, but you can't say they're not an immediate outlet. So I think we're sort of in the realm of the way they look at the team,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not employed by the team.
Right.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And you know, not using the word we, I know it's a big no-no sort of media circles because I tweeted this out because the word we include like signifies, I guess, inclusion, and inclusion can be extended to bias. But
sure.
like
and,
you said,
and there's that part. Oh, what? Are you a part of the team? Are you one of the players? Are you this? And no, but we are, you know, in as much as you take an ownership of a team that you're a fan of, whether that be a school team, a professional team, you know, your country at the Olympics. You know, like the common everyday vernacular is, oh, are we up or are we down? You know, how are we doing this year? There is definitely a feeling of ownership over like inclusion with the team, like as part of the fan base, you know, that is there. But you know, so that's why I personally have no problem with the idea of we. But I can understand how historically that was a thing. But as media and what media is and the definition of media continues to change and evolve, that to me is a thing that is not necessarily something that has to apply going forward across the board.
It's an old way of thinking that is changing almost daily.
Sure.
You know, and I can even go back when Stuart Scott was on ESPN, and everybody knew the guy was a North Carolina Tar Heel fan. And that sort of became the thing where the guys on SportsCenter, like maybe was a graduate from Northwestern, and they would go back and forth and start talking about their school. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, whoa. I'm like, are these guys like allowed to do that? Like, you know, openly root for, you know, they're reporting, they're doing the highlights, everything's unbiased. But, you know, if there's a clip of, you know, North Carolina versus Duke in college basketball, and Stuart Scott's doing it, he's going to put something in there about how he went to North Carolina. He wanted North Carolina to win. But then he does the highlights. And so I understand it if you're a Rick Stroud or a Greg Auman that works for a national, you know, because St. Pete Times, you know, you can get it nationally, or like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, things like that, where it's a national exposure paper where everyone in the United States can get it, where you don't use the word we, and that be frowned upon. But we're just talking about a local team.
Yeah.
And everyone's content that follows the Bucs is read by fans. I mean, so I'm not really sure. I get it.
To the point that you're talking about there, Ren, just in past conversations I've had with the guys, specifically from the Pewter Report, the way that the magazine / website, whatever that is now, has been led, and the way that they want to build their brand and the way they want to conduct their business and present their product is as unbiased people reporting on the Buccaneers who are also giving their opinion and their analysis, but that they are unbiased. And I have zero problem with that, and I can appreciate what they bring to the table. And you mentioned Greg Allman and Rick Stroud, two guys that we also rely on for lots of information, and we have a high deal of respect for what they do as well.
Yeah.
That is even still yet a different type of coverage, and the conversation that we then bring, and that what some of the other fan websites, and not just us, but when you think of the other fan podcasts and websites and things that are out there that are bringing really excellent coverage of this team. And I'm just tickled to death that we kind of get to be a part of that community here at the Pewtercast. It's just a different type. It's a different way to brand the media. But does that mean that you're not media? And is that something that negates you from getting credentials? And that's a place where honestly we just disagree. And by the way, the team. And Mark admitted to this. The team knows that we exist. They're trying to figure out what do they do with us. And it's not just the Buccaneers, but the NFL as a whole. Teams across the league are trying to figure out what do you do with people like us, and where do we – and this is really the bigger conversation. When does a website go from a fan page or a pamphlet or a blog into – a legitimate media site? When does a podcast or a little tiny radio show go from that to like this little fan thing into this is a credentialed media recognized outlet? Like at some point, those two things, is there a spot where that line crosses? That's not necessarily a brick wall, that exists between the two. And that really is a big part of the conversation that we continue to have with the Buccaneers. As we look through this, and it's a slow-going process, and understandably so.
And I just want to rewind just a little bit. As much as Pewter Report does do unbiased reporting, when the Bucs are winning, their their podcast, the Pewter Nation podcast, is much different from when they're losing. So you can sit there and say that they're not like. Mark Cook's been a lifelong Bucs fan. Trevor Sikkema has been a lifelong Bucs fan. Scott Reynolds has not been a lifelong Bucs fan, but he's followed the team for 20 plus years. And just the last pod or two pods ago, where they were pleading for Mike Smith to play press coverage. Well, why are they pleading for Mike Smith to play press coverage? Because they think the defense would do better. Or why do they want the defense to do better? Because they want the team to win. Now, you could have it's hard. You have that attitude, but then when you put out actually on the digital part of their website, you don't use the word we and you're unbiased, but you can't tell me that those guys and also the guys at Joe Bucs fan who will very quickly say yes, we're fans. Talk about. You can't tell me that the way the Bucs season goes doesn't affect them, because they are fans of the team, even though if you ask them, they will tell you vehemently they're not.
You mean Pewter Report or Joe Bucs fan? Because Joe Bucs fan will tell you, because I asked them specifically, do you consider yourselves fans of the team? And they tweeted this actually as a part of this conversation thread.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. Unequivocally, we are fans of the team. Now, that was Joe Bucs fan. And again, that goes back to that. This is how they build their brand. This is what they're building their brand around. Now, we can talk about, forget us, let's talk about the people who are in the media room. There are people in that media room that I would assume that don't believe that Joe Bucs fans should have media credentials. I would also assume, maybe not, I don't know, who think that maybe Pewter Report, because they're not a newspaper, television, or radio station, should have credentials. Maybe, possibly. There might be some people who are in that media room who used to work for one of those outlets and no longer works for one of those outlets and created something just to kind of keep it going. That, so there's this whole weird there, and that's the thing. And I want fans out there to understand this. Like, there is no textbook definition, at least by which the organization uses to say this is what equals media.
Right.
That doesn't exist. And where we have sort of had our conversations with the PR staff and different people just saying, hey, we would love to be in that conversation with you guys of helping to define that. And that's honestly what our friend Derek over at What the Buck, he's kind of been asking for. And if you read the Twitter feed, he talks quite a bit about that of, the criteria that they have has not been great criteria. And there just needs to be like to be in a spot where this is detailed of what that looks like. And, oh, by the way, for a smaller site to actually hit a certain reach or to have a commitment level, that it may not necessarily be about reach, but about a commitment level to covering the team or something of that nature. What are those criteria that define media? And that just doesn't exist right now.
Yeah, we're kind of in the Ryan Griffin double-edged sword right now.
That's a good point. Good way to put that.
I need, hey, I can't put you don't have any experience. Well, how do I get an experience if you never put me in? So those 2 days, I asked you, how many Twitter follows did the Pewtercast gain? And just because of those 2 days of coverage where we started to reach people that didn't know us, I went up about 50 or 60 people in 2 days. Mm-hmm. Derek Fournier, you mentioned What the Buck. He was talking about. He said something like, being allowed, I'm paraphrasing, being allowed to cover the Bucks will get you more exposure, which will get you more followers,
right,
which gets your reach bigger. But if you don't let us in the gate to do that, how do you, and that back to the Ryan Smith, it's like, well, yeah, you want our reach to be, a certain number. And they, like you said, they don't have that number yet, especially for a podcast, because we don't have a website and they can't, look up the number, because we were talking to Nelson Louise and he told us about a website that they use to track traffic on other websites, and that's how they traditionally sort of judged who gets credentialed and who doesn't, but they don't have
that's at least a factor in their judging,
right?
For it. Yeah, but that doesn't work for podcasting,
exactly.
And our friend Chris Fisher has gone on Twitter saying this a few times to the Buccaneers, those numbers that you pull are not, you cannot compare those to audio format, aka podcasting, or even new video format through YouTube and things like that, which are still they're newer forms of media, they're newer forms of coverage, but it doesn't make them any less legit. And it doesn't make them any less whatever. And I want to pull out what the Joe Bucks fans guys said, and I'm looking for it right now.
Okay, here it is. And he's quoting you from that thread, which, like you mentioned earlier, it's you got to sort of dig to be able to follow along. It says, Jiminy Christmas, Brent. Don't let anyone make you overthink stuff that's simple as first grade. You guys have shown a significant commitment to programming devoted to coverage the team. Oh, covering the team, I'm sorry. That's called media. Simple as that, as Levy would say.
Yeah. So I really appreciated that they said that, even given the tone that was used, because I tweeted back. I was like, I actually agree. Unfortunately, other people don't necessarily agree, and the people who actually make the decision either don't agree or they seem to be waffling on it. And that's where we're and that's kind of where we are right now. So
and it's
yeah,
and it's a tough spot for them, because it is,
absolutely.
it is, and by them I mean the Buccaneers, because it is so new, and you can't just let every Yahoo in that has a podcast.
Yeah.
You give them full media credentials all the time.
We wouldn't want Gene from Buck What You Heard in. I mean, my gosh. No, I'm just joking, Gene. I'm just joking. But no, you're absolutely right.
So yeah, they're trying to figure out what is the criteria for them, so they can sort of etch it in stone.
Mm-hmm.
So people that come after us, like, hey, hit these milestones or hit these markers or put this amount of time in or devotion to it, then, you can be considered for credentialed media. So, it's a slippery slope. And at the end of the day, once again, we're going to go back to Derek Fournier. It's really about who the Bucs want to let in.
Yep.
At the end of the day.
It's their discretion.
It's their discretion. So, if we got, 8,000 downloads per episode, and, we had 20,000 people that followed us on Twitter, that doesn't mean the Buccaneers are letting us in.
Right. Even though other people who have media credentials may only have, 1,500. And I have no clue what their click-throughs on their articles or whatnot might be, but, they might actually have numbers that are actually currently very, very similar to ours, And again, I don't know what all they have. I know what we have. But
anyway, it was an interesting conversation. It was a good talk, between Mark Cook, like you said, Joe Bucs fan, and the fans that jumped in. Most of the fans jumped in were supporting us and, looking forward to that. You deserve it. You guys put in the work and dedication. So it was fun. And I guess coming out of it, I can see both sides of the argument. And there's parts of the argument for both sides that I agree with. And at the end of the day, I guess, here we are.
Right. Here's what I could say, Ren. And I don't know, this may take a couple takes to actually word it in the way that we want to. As far as we go, now I can't speak for any other podcast, any other website that's out there. But, and we have made known to the Buccaneers that we would like, and we are pursuing what it looks like for us to be permanently credentialed. Like that's the goal that we would like to get to. All the obstacles notwithstanding. As far as we go, if we were to be permanently credentialed, we would, I guarantee you this, we would continue in our fandom. And Mark Cook might even disagree with me because he says doing this job kind of steals it from you. But it is, as far as we go, we will continue in our fandom. That part's not going to change. The type of coverage and the type of things that we are able to bring will definitely change and would definitely be improved upon. But we also will conduct ourselves, and I think the 2 days that we had showed that we can do that, and we will conduct ourselves in a manner that is consistent and in a manner that is professional with what it is to be media outlet and credentialed media outlet. Because one thing we learned is really quickly when you're there with the media badge, that fanboy stuff kind of falls away and you just slide into the job, so to speak.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And I also think, and we talked about this a little bit on previous pod, that I think it was definitely a test, that the Buccaneers and their PR staff giving us, and was, for better or worse of a word, watching us. Sure. And how we reacted and what we did. And, I don't feel like I even have to go to the point where, hey, if, we're going to act this way. I think they've seen it.
Right.
And I think we did slide in flawlessly. I do think in that, Ren, that you and I would, and we've talked about this for a year now, the types of questions that we would ask, the way we would approach some of those press conferences, I think would be different. There wouldn't be a lot of the same questions over and over again. It wouldn't be the same. There would be a difference in how we approach certain things because of our fandom and because of how we go about things, because of the type of show we are, as opposed to just being a website who's writing articles. So I definitely think that we would add to the conversation and what they have going on there. And I think you're right. I do feel like we acquitted ourselves pretty well, for the 2 days there. So we'll stay in that conversation with them. So to wrap this up, we have no idea what's going on.
Right. Yeah. Here's the deal. We had 2 days and that's it.
That's it.
We're back in the stands all season long.
And, this, you talked about it just a little while ago about, sort of what are the bylaws or, milestones that, podcasts or smaller websites have to reach, to sort of get their key to the Golden Gate. We don't know, and it still just boils down to whoever the Bucs, want to let in. So after all of this, it was a great conversation. I think you should go back, if you're interested, go back and start on Brent's Twitter and find it, and then read it, and feel free to chime in with your 2 cents as well. Yeah. But again, it was a good conversation, and I think we needed to sit here and talk about it because it sparked a lot of conversation from a lot of different people, and there was a lot of different sides to it, and a lot of different viewpoints. And I don't think any of them are wrong. Mm-hmm. I disagree a little bit here, a little bit there, but no one said anything that was absolutely just out of bounds, I think.
And at the end of the day, and I'm going to point to Mark Cook just because he was the catalyst behind this whole thing, we're still friends with Mark.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and he said it. He's like, Brent and Ren, I'll invite them both into my living room tomorrow. Like, we still maintain that respect and that friendship. I think this is an issue that we might be. And Mark has some good points.
He does. Yeah,
he really does. At the end of the day, though, I think that some of those points are just null in today's world.
Outdated. Mm-hmm. Outdated. A little too much classic media, which is which is fine. All right, man. Well, Brent, thank you so much for coming on and discussing with me. We sort of caught lightning in a bottle with that harmless tweet we started out, and but like I said, it sparked some good stuff, and I'm glad we got to come on and talk about it. Yeah. All right, listeners, we have a segment coming up with an inside interview with Sean Jensen, Ryan Jensen's dad, where you can find out the real reason why Ryan Jensen decided to sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's coming up right now. All right, this is Ren Daxt here, and I am on the phone with Ryan Jensen's father, Mr. Jensen. He has asked me to call him Dean, and I will from here on out. How you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, no problem. The impetus of this interview was I met you at the stick carrier draft party, and we were talking back and forth about some stories about Ryan, and you told me this great story about sort of his free agency period. But before we get there, let's start from what I guess Bucs fans really know about Ryan so far. He's had a few interviews here and there, but the big one has been with Carmen Vitale, staff writer for the Buccaneers, where he went around and tried barbecue at a few different places. You told me off air that this is something that he sort of did on his own. He went out and was always a cook, and he always wanted to cook for the family. But you told me this story about how his older brother Seth, who actually played for Nebraska, was a big-time recruit, and it was their plan for Seth to be the NFL football player and Ryan to be the cook. Well, can't you just tell me how that all came about? And
Oh, sure, Ren. What it was is, Seth growing up was a phenomenal athlete, Ryan's older brother, and he was recruited by 12, 13 different Division I schools. Well, the boys kind of cooked up this idea that someday Seth was going to make it to the NFL. And, they were going to start up a chain of restaurants. Seth has a nickname. It's called Chicky. That was his nickname. So, and Ryan's nickname is Red. So they were going to call it Chicky Reds, and they were going to open up this chain of stores or chain of restaurants, and Ryan was going to be the gourmet cook for all of this. So Ryan's been he's kind of been like a little chef tell his whole life.
Chicky Reds. I like that. That would have caught on. Well, instead, Ryan ended up being the professional player. He went to Colorado State, Division II school, gets drafted by the Ravens, actually gets cut his rookie year and hangs on the practice squad. And then he sort of starts this slow climb to where last year became the starting center. Can you talk about a little bit of how that progressed for Ryan and, sort of his attitude from, even from a youth or in college that you knew that eventually he was going to get there?
Well, the thing about Ryan is at a very early age, he showed the competitive spirit that he had. I had both of the boys. My wife and I ran a martial arts studio, a taekwondo studio. Okay. And both of the boys were very much involved in martial arts during their entire lives. And this is where Ryan's competitive nature came out. And Ryan's always been a really quiet kid, but extremely competitive kid. And as Ryan moved forward, as he got older, his brother was, in 8th grade, Seth was 275 pounds and 6'1". Seth was just, he grew very quickly, and he was known for his ferocious hitting, and he was a defensive tackle. And, Ryan growing up with Seth, was always very competitive with his brother. Well, as things went on, Seth drew a lot of interest and ended up picking the University of Nebraska to go to, and Ryan had this legacy. Ryan was a lot smaller player in high school. I mean, he was markedly smaller than his brother, to the point that he'd get teased about being smaller. And, Ryan Ryan talked about having a chip on his shoulder. Well, that's where it started. And as he went through high school, Ryan was just ferocious on the field. He was undersized. He didn't have the greatest amount of speed, but he was just so committed to what he did, and he worked so hard. And, Ryan wasn't cut his first year in the NFL. When he was signed with the Ravens in 2013 out of CSU Pueblo,
right.
What happened to Ryan his first season is, I think it was his first or second OTA, Ryan broke a bone in his foot.
Okay.
And that put him out for the entire season, and they kept him on the 53-man roster the whole season, even though he didn't play.
Okay, so they're protecting him.
It was his second season that he got cut, and that had to do with sleep apnea. He was losing weight. He wasn't playing well, and he wasn't going to anybody and telling them what was wrong and that he wasn't getting rest. When we finally got that straightened out, then and Ryan got on a CPAP machine and started doing markedly better, got his weight back, got his strength back, and then finally fought his way back to the 53-man roster by the end of his second season. And then his third and fourth season, I think he played in a dozen games or so, maybe a little more. And, he was a backup player, and, he did well. He grew a lot those 2 years. And then finally last year with the Ravens, he played all 16 games, and he took advantage of that opportunity. He showed his tenacity on the field, and, getting those consistent starts really, really helped his career.
Yeah, and now he's parlayed that into a big contract with our Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and fans are glad that he's here. Really going to solidify the line, at least as from fans' point of view, we really hope it does. Especially the left side. I think that's going to be a strong point for the Buccaneers. Now, before that, he had people courting him, and mainly it was us, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Indianapolis Colts. He came to the Bucs first. Can you talk a little bit about did he call you like after the Bucs visit or during the Bucs visit? Did he tell you how it went? Can you talk a little bit about how he felt and how they treated him there at One Buc Place? Oh yeah, he felt very much welcomed by the Buccaneers. I mean, Jason Light. Kind of an interesting story is Jason's family is from Colorado, and I believe that Jason and his family actually knew of or saw the boys play baseball, because I think Jason was involved with some stuff over, I think it was Yuma or Eaton or someplace. It was one of the smaller towns is where Jason was from, and he knew of the boys. So he kind of followed the boys' careers when they were younger, unbeknownst to me. And so Jason, when he had the opportunity, to bring Ryan in, I mean, they did a lot of great things for him. They just showed him that, we really want you down here. And Ryan felt that when he was down here. And he did call me, when he said, hey, I had a great visit. He sent me a picture of this really cool airbrushed helmet that they made for him. Yeah,
and,
that.
Like, I think you guys have seen that. It's really cool.
Yeah, it went around social media.
Yep. So he he left there feeling pretty doggone good. And, then the Indianapolis Colts sent down a jet to pick him up there in Tampa, and then they took him up, and he had a chance to go meet with the staff up there, and he had a good visit with them as well.
Right. Well, when he got on the plane and left, a lot of us were. It was pretty much between those two. So a lot of us were I guess second guessing Jason's light decision to be first or second because you knew he was coming. Like, I guess the free agency, the rule of thumb is don't let him leave the building. But we knew that Ryan was going to leave the building no matter what. So when he jumped on that plane and went to Indianapolis, the fans were biting our nails and worrying about it. So can you tell us a little bit about how that visit went? You said he had a good visit, but the story that I remember, and the story I remember at Buffalo Wild Wings was there were some things that they're asking him to do at Indianapolis that he wasn't sure he could do or didn't want to do. Can you just clarify that a bit for me?
Sure. A lot of what it was, the reason that it went down the way it did, Ren, is,
right.
Mike McCartan is Ryan's agent, and he talked with Jason and said, look, Ryan's coming down there to meet you. He's not coming down there to talk numbers. He's not coming down there to sign anything. He just wants to meet you, and he wants to meet, the folks up in Indianapolis too. So, what Mike was asking Ryan to do is be a professional and give everybody their due, and to listen closely to what was going on. Well, when he went up to meet with Andrew Luck, they sat down and they watched film, and they wanted Ryan to play guard. And Ryan, he wanted his heart set on playing center, but they wanted him to play guard, and they ran a lot of zone blocking. And Ryan just felt like zone blocking scheme isn't his strength. They ran power most of the time in the Ravens organization, and that's what Ryan was good at. And he was worried that he wouldn't shine playing guard and running zone blocking as well as he would shine coming down here and just going man versus man, get the guy across from you and get into the second level and earhole somebody. That's the game that Ryan likes, and that's the game that Ryan's built for. And that had a lot to do with his decision. And the fact, the game that they were asking Ryan to play, what Jason was going to ask him to do down here, felt better with Ryan's skill set. He felt that he would be more successful, and the fact that he was really overwhelmed by the positive vibes that he got from the Bucs, and he knew that this was the right decision for him. When he landed in Denver after he got done visiting, he called. He told Mike that, his agent, and then of course, they worked out the contract details, and he called me back after the contract details were taken care of, and Ryan was just completely overwhelmed. He was so emotional he couldn't even hardly walk out of the airport. Ryan got into Denver, and he sent me a text message, and he said, Dad, call me. And I said, all right. So I called him up, and I said, how's it going? He goes, well, he said, all things considered, and he kind of explained what I explained earlier about how he felt that he'd fit the scheme better, and that he felt more of a connection to what was going to happen down in Florida than he did up in Indianapolis. So he made his decision, said, I'm going to go with the Bucs, and he hung up and said, I'm going to call my agent, and he hung up. And then a little while later, he sent me another text message, and he said, call me now, ! And I'm like, okay. So I called him, and I called him up, and I said, hey, Red, what's going on? And I didn't hear anything, and I started looking at my phone like, sort of like what we were having trouble with earlier. Looking at my phone like he's not answering me. And then I kept listening, and I could hear him breathing. And I go, Red, are you okay? I go, what's going on? And he just burst out. He goes, he told me the deal, what the contract was, and he was just overcome, by emotion and the whole situation. He was just absolutely overcome by what he'd heard back from his agent and what was going to be done and what his contract was going to be about for Tampa Bay. So, biggest moment of that young man's life, and, huge moment for all of us in the family that, everything that he'd done and where he had come from and all the effort that he put in to have an opportunity to come down and play for Tampa Bay. And, just completely overwhelmed our family. I mean, we went for days just overwhelmed.
Yeah, congratulations to him. Congratulations to you and your family. I just want to make sure I heard this right. He decided to come to Tampa before he even started talking numbers?
It was what he was going to do is he was going to let his agent know, because Mike wanted Ryan to make his decision based upon where he felt he was going to be able to be the most successful, and that he didn't want Ryan worrying about numbers. He wanted Ryan to tell him, Mike, what he wanted, so that Mike could then go and say, they had ideas. I mean, they had ideas from Indianapolis, what they were looking at. And of course, there was some money talk.
Of course.
But in the end, what Mike told us, and it's the truth, is that it's important. The financial part of this is important, but the other part of it is you got to go down there and work for 4 to 5 years. And if you're working a job, money's one thing, but if you're not happy or you don't feel that you're being successful in what you're doing, that money's not everything. And
agreed.
Ryan sees that opportunity, in Tampa, and saw that opportunity in Tampa that he could come down there and help this team, and that it was playing to his strengths as a player. And that's, what really tipped him over the edge is he knows that what he's going to be doing down there, he can help this team.
Yeah, we're excited to have him. There was actually a guy who used to have a Bucs podcast, an X's and O's guy, and he was all over your son Ryan Jensen like months before free agency started. He was doing the Ryan Jensen at center train and getting everybody on board the bandwagon. So we really knew about him even before free agency started. Like, he was a target for the fans thanks to a guy named Chris Fitcher out of Orlando. But, thank you so much for the stories. I think the listeners are really going to like it. It gives it insight to sort of who he is as a person and you as a father and the family in general. Are you going to make it down to any Bucs games this year?
Oh, absolutely. Wouldn't miss it for the world. We're going to start the season off. We're going to go to New Orleans. And
nice.
then I think right now we've got 5 or 6 travel plans for games. And then next year I'm going to be retired before the season starts next year. So next year you're going to have a tough time keeping Dad away from the stadium.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Congratulations on your retirement early. I'm going to say that right now. And when you get down here, I'll keep in touch with you, and maybe we can hook up at a tailgate, and put a name with the face and that sort of thing, and we'll talk a little Buccaneers football. How's that sound?
Sounds good, Red.
And once again, thank you so much for coming on, and you're welcome on the show anytime.
Okay, Ren. Thanks, man. Go Bucs.
Go Bucs. Well, there you have it. I hope you guys enjoyed the Ryan Jensen interview as told through the eyes of his dad, Sean Jensen, and his free agency journey that eventually landed him here as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. And the conversation that Brent and I had, where do pods like us fit into Buccaneers media, I should say. A programming note. The Rtcj is back. Brent and I will be going live almost immediately after the Miami Dolphins game on Thursday. We'll be going live on Mixler and YouTube.com. Of course, the chat rooms will be open on each, and feel free to call. Follow the Pewtercast on Twitter. It has the phone number and all the information on there. And it's going to be a fun year, guys, and we're just getting geared up. The best way to contact me, if you're interested, is at Ren Daxt on Twitter. REN_DAXT, and as always, I'm always down to talk Buccaneers football. So we will see you Thursday night. Be safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Shiver my timbers, shiver my soul, yo-ho-he-ho. There are men whose hearts are as black as coal, yo-ho-he-ho.
Sailed their ship across the ocean blue, a bloodthirsty captain and a cutthroat crew.
It's as dark a tale as was ever told of the lust for treasure and the love of gold. Shiver my timbers, shiver my sides, yo.
their sins in rum. The devil himself would have to call them scum.
Every man on board would have killed his mate for a bag of guineas or a piece of bait. A piece of bait.
A piece of bait. 5, 6, 7, 8.
Hula waka, something not right. Many wicked, icky things gonna happen tonight. Hula waka, sailor man beware.